presents Hardwire Heartache, Synthetic Love Stories, Episode 3, The Varangian. A one-seated speeder skiff fell down almost silently through the atmosphere of Topoli. Landing in front of the Rust City Circus, a group of androids and mechanics scurried around, trying to break down the big top and get everything onto the old caravans. The chrome gold-wing door lifted slowly as air hissed from the depressurizing cockpit. A slender woman with dancer-like grace and an almost eerily serene look stepped languidly toward the ticket counter. Ratnik squinted his eyes to see what it was she was carrying under her arm.
Show's cancelled, Toots. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Mariko continued to walk gracefully forward. Her feet didn't even make noise on the long deactivated metal slidewalk. Her hips swayed gently to some sultry internal rhythm. In what seemed like two strides, she was standing in front of the ticket booth and Ratnik. She smiled a tiny rosebud of a smile from perfect rose-colored lips. But as Ratnik stared at her, it seemed to twist into a psychotic, toothy grin.
Cancelled, you say? Let me guess. A death in the family?
Her sweet, crisp voice was interrupted by the heavy clanking of the severed head of Bill the android as she dropped it onto the ticket counter. Ratnik's eyes were so glued to it he didn't even notice a razor-sharp blade of a sword creeping up under his chin. Mariko pressed the rat creature's chin upward with the blade, and her coal-black, half-lidded gaze stuck into his like poisonous darts.
Don't move. Don't call out. Don't struggle.
Ratnik couldn't have done any of those things if he'd tried for 100 years. He was frozen in place and quivering with terror as Mariko's impeccable human face grew dark and menacing. She leaned in and inhaled the scent of terror pouring out of Ratnik, languishing in it like it was a fine wine.
Now, you're going to be a good little rat and tell me everything I want to know. If you don't want to end up like your metal friend there.
Mariko's hand swiftly moved to Ratnik's large ear and grasped it as she pulled him effortlessly over the table and dragged his bulbous little frozen body back to the speeder skiff to begin her interrogation. Birx, Mikey, Diamond Eyes, Daphne and Grell all found themselves sitting in a darkened cell inside of an alien-looking space frigate. Grell marveled at the technology on display throughout the ship as a mountain of a man sat across the galley with his back turned to him.
It's remarkable. The ship is like a spyglass into the future of space travel. Supposedly, the Varangian flew into a black hole and landed on the alien star system in the distant future.
Yeah, well, it sounds like bullshit to me. Everybody knows black holes are a one-way trip.
Yeah, but just because some things are usually half bullshit doesn't mean they aren't sometimes half true, if that makes any sense.
Mikey kept a close eye on the pilot, watching him silently pluck the control panel. The one person who knew the truth was right in front of him. He stood up and started to make his way over to the man when he was suddenly stopped by a small-framed woman with brownish red hair.
Now, I'm sure everyone has questions about Bjorn. Mr. Varangian, I'll try and answer what I can, but for now, it's best to leave him to piloting.
Mikey briefly considered brushing past her. Once his mind was set on something, everything else fell away, and he had to get his answers. As he glanced down at the perfect little hand pressed gently against his chest, he could already feel he wouldn't be winning any shoving matches with Rosie. Sighing, his eyes still peeled on the Varangian. He slipped back against the bench of the cell and watched as Rosie set up little teacups next to each of the passengers.
Well, I hope y'all like jasmine tea. If I'd have known we were having company.
Birx sat slumped over with his head in his hand as Daphne lay sleeping on his lap. He had been silent since they were escorted to a cell after arriving on the ship. It made him uneasy, but they had no other choice as there wasn't any seating anywhere else. The containment shields were powered off, but Birx half expected them to come slamming down at any minute. If anyone could get to the Varangian, it was Teruo Mizukawa, and the price on their heads was bound to be enough to set someone up for life. His instinct told him not to trust anyone. Diamond Eyes raised her cup of tea as Grell activated his holopad and held it up to her. She took a sip, savoring the nuanced flavors, while Grell's eyes widened in admiration, not just for the sophisticated code allowing her to detect delicate notes in the tea, but also for the free will code that appeared to be shaping her opinion of the experience as it unfolded.
I can't believe I'm witnessing the birth of an opinion in real time. This is true free will. Only someone like Mizukawa would have the bollocks to program like this.
That is correct. I was created with free will, just like the rest of you.
Rosie's head tilted slightly as she watched Diamond Eyes. Her programming couldn't conceive of an AI android that was truly free of a directive. Many believed that artificial science of that level was intensely dangerous, so much so that making one was illegal in every corner of the galaxy. Rosie was nearly free of directive herself, aside from Rule 1 of robotics and her duty to her marriage to the Varangian. Mikey's eyes drifted from Diamond Eyes and back to Rosie before he quipped.
Hey, yeah, that's great. She thinks she's people. Anyways, what's the real story on the Varangian? And can I report on it?
Mikey understood how the mistreatment of microwaves was a bad thing. They were 99% human. But he drew the line at androids. 100% synthetic. Like a magic trick set up to fool lonely suckers into believing attractive people were actually in love with them.
Sugar, I'll tell you all you need to know. However, as a person who's told this story a few times before, I assure you, it never sounds too believable.
A wry smile made its way across high-boned cheeks as she turned her hand palm up, and a small projection of an ancient-looking speeder skiff formed at her eye level.
This is the SS Arbiter, piloted by Captain Bjorn Sigurdsson and his wife, a scientist by the name of Luna. Nearly 500 years ago, they were explorers on the outer rim of the galaxy. Sadly, in their travels, they were lost in an awful battle between the United Fleet and a pirate lord with the call sign Calayuga.
Mikey leaned forward a bit and reached for his holopad. He pressed the button and it began to write down what it was hearing. The holograph moved along with the story as she told it, her fingers dancing beneath it. It showed the battle and subsequent blasts that pushed the Arbiter into the black hole.
Like Girl mentioned, the Arbiter was knocked into a black hole and disappeared. Captain Bjorn crash-landed on an alien world on the other side of the black hole. Bjorn and Luna survived, but the Arbiter was done for. While exploring the planet's surface, though, they wandered upon a crashed alien ship.
The image changed to a miniature wreck of the ship they were presently on. Though by the looks of it on the holo, there was a two-seat speeder. Mikey's eyes narrowed as he studied the little image on the holo and tried to stop her.
That's not even the same ship. What did you do? Add extra room since you found it?
Honey, does eating your ice cream too fast get you anything but a headache? This ship is so far advanced that 500 years later, its technology is still light years better than anything else floating around that Milky Way. She's got self-repair, walls that can change shape with just a touch, and most fascinating of all, the black hole generator.
The Wraith can actually produce black holes? If that's true, such technology could rewrite everything we know about physics and space itself.
She sure can, sweetness. She not only produces them, but she can navigate them as well.
Everyone sat completely still, watching the little holograph as the story unfolded. It seemed almost too incredible to be true. Birx squinted his eyes as if trying to put it all together was beyond him at the moment.
So you mean to tell me that the Varangian is over 500 years old? I don't buy it. And where's this Luna gal now?
Rosie smiled a warm smile and waited for Birx to finish what he was saying before continuing her story.
Bless your heart. You just go and say whatever you're thinking, don't you, honey? Over the years, Captain Bjorn and Luna learned the Wraith inside and out. They continued to explore with the Wraith as their new home among the stars. Luna gave birth to their son, Bjorn II, right here amongst the stars. Upon their return to the Sol system, they found the United Fleet was nearly eradicated by Kali-Yuga and his pirates. They landed on Mars, and while Bjorn stayed to service the ship, Luna went to resupply. The second Luna entered the spaceport, she was attacked by Kali-Yuga's men, and during her escape, she was mortally wounded.
The hologram changed into the Wraith in orbit, tearing through Kali-Yuga's fleet like a hot knife through butter, then positioned itself and fired onto a pale green and blue colored planet in an unknown system.
Beside himself with grief, Bjorn had chased Kali-Yuga back to his hideout within a few weeks, and then proceeded to destroy the entire planet from orbit. The United Fleet does not take too kindly to a planet killer, so Bjorn and son became fugitives. For the next 40 years, they took mercenary work for anyone who had the credits, until Papa Bjorn passed away of old age. Long before his demise, however, people took to calling him the Varangian, named after a group of fierce Norse warriors, a moniker that Bjorn Secrets in the Sixth still uses to this very day.
Everyone's eyes had shifted to the man in the cockpit seat now, as the story came together in an even more unbelievable manner than any of them could have fathomed. Birx's attention turned to the plaque, where he began reading the many names below Luna's. It was basically a 500-year lineage of all who had lived aboard this ship.
Hey, that's great and all, but you still didn't mention that little glitch in your presentation. Why is this ship different than the original?
Oh, that's not a glitch, sugar. And the Wraith isn't just a ship. She's actually alive, and she's been growing for all these years. In fact, the reason Bjorn has been so quiet is because he's telepathically linked to the ship as we speak.
Mikey's eyes widened, and a pale green color came over his complexion as he began to realize he was inside of a creature instead of a ship.
Oh, God.
Grell, however, ran his hands along the warm interior walls of the ship and smiled as he could feel a faint fluctuation that seemed almost like a heartbeat thrumming gently.
So it's a 500-year-old alien that looks like a ship. How long does it live?
That one's a toughie. The Wraith's memories act as sort of a ship's log, and from what we can tell, she's still pretty young.
Mikey felt a buzzing and took his holopad from his pocket. It was a call calling from an unlisted number on Sakanaco. He slipped off into the corner of the cell as Rosie was answering questions and clicked to answer the call.
I can't believe I got through. Listen, I don't know exactly what is going on, but some scary girl was asking around about you.
Conlon kept looking over his shoulder as his face dipped in and out of shadow. He was obviously on the move. His feet splashed heavily in puddles of Sakanaco's streets, and the roar of the rain made him hard to hear.
Did you get a name? What happened?
I was too terrified to ask, but she was asking about you and that Birx guy. When the bartender wouldn't answer her questions, she started cutting him up. I don't know if he cracked. I ran.
Is she still there? Is she following you?
By this time, the conversation had caught the attention of Birx, and he quietly sat closer to Mikey in order to eavesdrop. Mikey seemed to be concentrating so much on the call, he didn't even notice Birx.
I don't know. I don't think she noticed me, but I owed you one, so I figured the least I could do was give you a heads up.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We're at the safest place on the galaxy right now. I'm not worried
About you, though.
I'll lay low for a while. It's easy enough to get lost in the crowd. On Sakanaco.
Not a moment after the transmission ended, the ray shook violently. Throwing everyone about the cabin. Birx immediately reached for Daphne and came between her and the wall just in time to crash into it himself. A strange siren noise that sounded more like a cry of a great injured beast could be heard amongst the chaos and then an eerie stillness.
Bjorn, honey, what on earth was that?
The Varangian's grave words betrayed his calm demeanor as his eyes squeezed shut, trying to maintain the connection with the Wraith.
It's the Hagakure. The pilot has incapacitated the ship and is trying to find a way inside.
That's impossible, right? We're in the hyperspace lane.
And what in the cosmic fuck is a Hagakure?
Brace for impact! Shit!
The violent shake and a terrified sounding wail from the ship was heard before the lights and gravity cut out, as the ship was violently ripped from the hyperspace lane. A maneuver that would have shredded a lesser ship apart and tossed the twisted debris into the lonely, empty vacuum of space. For a moment, time seemed to have stopped as the ship floated lifelessly in the stillness of open space. Somehow, Bjorn managed to get back to the controls and restored auxiliary power. In the tiny incandescent red glow that cast dark shapes about the cavity of the vessel, everyone was afloat aside from Rosie, who was walking her way back to Bjorn, and Diamond Eyes, who stood straight up like a black spike in the center of the floor, which at this moment could have been more accurately been called the ceiling. A crackling was heard, like fuzz over an old AM transmission, eerie and empty. Then came the breaths, barely audible at first, but pregnant with menace.
Short-range sensors just came online. Still trying to get a lock on that transmission.
Knock. Knock.
Who's there?
Birx slipped his hand over Daphne's mouth and shook his head at her silently.
Hey, now might be a good time to get that black hole machine fired up, don't you think?
The Varangian shook his head and his grim and determined face finally softened as he looked at Rosie. Her expression was of concern, both for her husband as well as the Wraith. This was more than just a ship to the two of them. It was their home. Diamond Eyes gracefully released a gravity matrix and landed beside Bjorn with a clank. Gravity matrix tech is a standard feature on most androids, which allows them to operate normally in zero gravity as well as dense gravity situations. Originally designed for use on deep space stations, she leaned in and whispered to him just as another transmission came across.
Knock, knock. Tick-tock.
The Varangian's eyes came up to Diamond Eyes and locked with hers for a moment before he returned the transmission.
No need for theatrics, Mizukawa. I'm releasing the android to your custody immediately. She ain't our problem.
Bjorn, you can't do this. She's innocent. She's a person.
Grell's protest landed on deaf ears as Diamond Eyes turned to face him. Her expression was one of surprise and sadness as she then smiled at Grell.
It's gonna be alright. If I don't get to see you again, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for me. It made me feel like you actually saw me for who I am, and not just a device.
Her hands clenched into fists and nodded once before she dematerialized. Looks like the gang is hanging on the edge of their seats after the Varangian gave up Diamond Eyes so easily. Guess he wasn't the fighting type after all. And what does it mean for the rest of the passengers? Find out next time on Hardwire Heartache, Episode 4, Dead Man's Gambit. Yay!